All right. Welcome. Hello, this is Krista with thelifeinprogress.ca, and my beautiful guest today is Erica Layne of the Life on Purpose movement. Eric and I are going to be talking today, having an informal conversation about the idea of making space in our lives for what we most want or need. So a little bit about Erica. I'm guessing that a lot of my community already knows you, Erica, but just in case, it's always nice to meet new people. I'll let them know a little bit about you. So Erica is a sunset chaser, mom of 3, author of The Minimalist Way, and founder of the Life on Purpose movement. She's passionate about helping women trade overwhelm and fatigue for focus and peace. So a formal welcome, Erica.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
We are our second interview. And so anybody listening, if you want to hear our first interview, we chatted about, I think interested in making friends as an introvert, so something along those lines. So ask me where you find that interview, or you can check the videos on my Facebook page and find that too. So Erica.
Hey, quick jump in. On my end, your audio is kind of funny.
Verbally?
Oh, now it seems better. Say something.
Okay. Are we ready to continue?
Okay, yeah. Now it's good. Maybe it's just my connection. Sorry.
Well, it could be here too. I find with the pandemic, everybody on using Wi-Fi and all of that, it can happen. So thanks for letting me know. If it happens again, we'll just do our best because we're recording. But if I have to, I can run and try to earphones or something.
Right. Me too. Yeah. Okay. You're good now. So.
All right. So Erica, I did send you notes in advance of, but with your permission, I'd love to ask you a couple questions that help me get to know you on a deeper level. And I really like that we also kind of illustrate to anybody listening that we're all in progress and we're all walking our talk. So, and kind of just figuring life out as we go as well in some ways.
Absolutely.
So, I would love for you to share, what do you see as a couple of your greatest strengths, and how are you walking in these strengths to make space for joy in your life?
Okay. Yes, this is a great question. It's kind of hard to start, or maybe it just goes against my nature a little bit to start off talking about what's great about you. You know, it feels like bragging or something, but I get that your community understands that knowing your gifts and just trying to live into them and fulfill them is a huge part of finding joy and contributing to the world positively. So it is so important to look for and recognize them. So I would say that one of mine is just being perceptive and intuitive. I tend to perceive how people feel or maybe what they're thinking without them using a lot of words. I feel like I can read facial expressions and kind of read between the lines pretty well. And although that sounds a bit dangerous because you don't want to make assumptions, my experience has just shown me that my perceptions are usually, not always, but usually on point. So thankfully, I'm reserved enough not to get pushy with people or act like I know better when I am reading between the lines. But I'm grateful for that. And my husband, he's more, I don't know, like I'm sort of the more cerebral of the two of us. He's more of a doer and a talker and more extroverted. So he seems to often rely on my intuition when we're making decisions, because decisions come like not necessarily day-to-day decisions. I can struggle with those, but like the overall decisions that really matter for our lives, I usually have a pretty good sense of just what might be right for us without having really a lot of concrete reasons why. I'll just kind of know in my gut. Okay. So that would be the second one I'd say, is trusting my gut. I tend to just know, have like this sense of knowing in my belly, really, and I can often go off of that. So I love that.
I love that. I'm very much gut-led too.
Yes. And you are we both INFJs, or are we one letter different on my
one? Yeah, I'm ISFJ, but often mistaken for IN.
Right. Yeah.
And I think because I am a very gut-led person, but I consistently fall into the sensing, yeah,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
position. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I love that. Okay, so are you do you feel like, even if it's not sort of a scientifically validated kind of notion, would you identify it as an empath?
Oh, that's a great question. I haven't really decided about that because I do think that I absorb the emotions of my immediate family, but I think that I can have, and people tend to tell me their feelings and thoughts, and I love hearing them. But outside of my immediate family, they don't often weigh me down. I
Okay.
suddenly need a drink.
Yeah, no. We will just take a little unexpected break. And this is the reality of live conversations.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
I always get a frog in my throat at the worst times.
Yeah. I was just like, all of my videos are just like that. I don't edit anything. So this is
Yeah.
just real life.
I don't have a cough or anything. I just suddenly am just choking.
It happens. Yep. So
One time that happened to me in a really, really, really quiet church building.
oh, okay.
And this old man next to me gave me like a mint, and it saved my life.
So you haven't decided yet about the empath, and it's interesting
Yeah,
because I haven't either. And people often, because I am a
really.
highly sensitive person, and
Right.
often HSPs are also might identify as being empathic or whatever. And I was working with a psychologist this summer, and she
Mm-hmm.
assumed I was as well. And I thought, no, I don't, I honestly don't think I am. I think there is a line of distinction somehow between, yes, I can absolutely like pick up emotion and I'm very compassionate and I have to really be guarded against sort of being weighed down by
Right.
all the weight of the world. But there, when I read about it, I'm like, I don't think that's me.
It's just not quite me. Yes, that's exactly how I am. Like I would consider myself a highly sensitive person just because I can absorb emotion and I am really sensitive to a lot of stimulation. But an empath, I feel like if I were truly an empath, it might be a little harder for me to set some emotional boundaries, and I seem to be able to do that okay. It's a little harder for me with my kids and my husband, but outside of my immediate circle, easier. So
Yeah. All right. Thanks for sharing that. So just checking my notes here. Okay. So my next question was, clutter comes in various forms, and we're going to chat a little bit about this. But what form of clutter tends to be the most challenging for you, Erica, or maybe like as a family unit? And can you offer us an example or two of what that might look like?
yeah, I think it would probably be easiest for me to kind of define what they are. So in my work, I often talk about physical, mental, and emotional clutter. Physical is what you'd expect. It's just anything that's getting in the way of the life that you really want to live. Mental clutter is all of that information that's stored in your mind. It's also often referred to as the mental load. We're kind of seeing that buzzword in articles and media right now. It's like the sports schedules and the doctor's appointments and the wedding that you still need to RSVP to and the date of your boss's birthday. It's just like all of the information in your head, information, to-dos, that kind of stuff. And then there's emotional clutter. And emotional clutter, I consider that any thought or script in your mind that you tend to run through a lot and it's holding you back in some way. So I can talk about some of my own, but let's see, you asked maybe what I struggle with the most.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd say definitely emotional clutter. That's just the heaviest and it seems the hardest to root out. I think most people in my community kind of follow this, and I bet yours, follow this natural progression where first you notice how your physical clutter is making you feel. and you notice that you're spending way too much time taking care of all your stuff and shuttling all the stuff upstairs and downstairs and, putting it away and fixing it and all that stuff. And that starts to drive you crazy. So you tackle that first. So a lot of people start with their physical clutter, and then after you've really made some good headway on your physical clutter, I think you naturally start, going the next layer deeper. Yeah. And that would usually be mental clutter. So then you start noticing how busy your mind is and how hard it is to feel centered or present or peaceful up there upstairs. So then you might start, making lists and seeing what you can take off your plate, and what you don't need to be doing at all. Just kind of reprioritizing your life. And yeah, maybe practicing something like Power Hour, where you write down, like, for a couple of weeks, you're like kind of keeping note of the little nagging to-dos that you need to get done, like phone calls you need to make that you never want to make, and that kind of stuff. And so you practice Power Hour, where you bang that all out in 1 hour and you're done. And it's no longer just weighing your mind down. So little practices like that can help. And then once you have a little bit of, of mastery over your mental clutter, once it's starting to feel less burdensome, then if you're still interested in this whole minimalism thing and finding more peace and simplicity in your life, then you might start looking at your emotional clutter. And that is the hardest to me because it's so deeply rooted, but it's also the most powerful when you can make changes with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say my work centers more there.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
kind of more where I do my work, but I do bring in aspects of, some decluttering challenges and kind of talking about that. But I also think there's already so many beautiful voices doing and really, really doing it well, like talking about those elements of it that I can direct people towards.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we kind of have merged my first couple of questions here, but so I'm just curious, Erica, do you, like, so you mentioned that where you might find things more difficult is that emotional clutter. Does your family have any resistance at all? Like, you teach about minimalism, you teach about releasing these things that no longer serve us. Does your own family have any opposition to some of this?
Oh, yes, here and there. I mean, I try to subscribe to the idea that your children will be who they're going to be, and it's not my job to make them into who I want them to be.
Yeah.
So I try to keep a pretty light touch on minimalism with them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the amount of stuff that they have impacts me and impacts how I interact with them, because when I'm so overwhelmed by all of their crap, then it's so much harder for me to be present and connected with them. So I'll talk about that. I'll say, in order for me to be my best self, I can't spend all of my time picking up your dirty socks, and I can't spend all of my time like bringing your skateboards in because you left them outside, and your knee pads, and
Yeah.
So I'll just sort of try to share like the why behind why I want to live this way, and look for little teaching opportunities, like when they really, really, really want something for a while, and maybe they save up and get it, but then like a week later they want something else, and they've lost interest in it, basically, unless a friend comes over or something. So I try to look for those opportunities to just gently be like, hey, just a reminder, that's why our stuff doesn't really bring us like lasting joy, and our human brains are always going to want the next thing. So I find it most helpful if I try to minimize those like material wants and focus more on experiences and chances to connect as a family. And so as long as our stuff furthers those goals, then I don't mind them too much. But yeah, I've thrown out a few things of theirs that they wish I hadn't thrown out. I threw out this autographed photo of Alex Honnold, I think. He's like a really famous rock climber. Like he's a free climber, solo. Yeah, I don't know.
Like
Anyway, he
freestyle,
got
like without all the gear.
without ropes. Yeah. And he did like El Capitan in Yosemite recently. And my boys met him and he autographed this thing for him. My husband took them to this event in San Francisco. And we had those posters hanging up in their rooms for at least 6 months, maybe even a year. And then we moved. And when you move, you just naturally do a purge. And I'm like, okay, that was fun. Like toss that. And then that guy got a big National Geographic documentary made about him that was in IMAX theaters. And he
Oops.
got super famous. So now they give me a hard time about that always.
Mhm.
But overall, not there's not too much friction about it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay. I've shared this before, but for me
Yeah.
too, I don't dictate for my kids, and my kids are a bit
Yeah.
older now too, but I don't dictate for them who they should be or what,
Right.
some of them are more inclined to have like my I have one shopper and she is a shopper. She also doesn't mind working hard to make lots of money and then
Right.
like, do her own, but she's
Right.
20. I don't get to make these
Yeah.
decisions. Um,
Anymore.
but I do insist though that our main living spaces are
Exactly.
simple and decluttered because it really
Mhm.
does play a huge role in me feeling calm and able to
Absolutely.
focus and all of those things. So we kind of navigate that.
Absolutely.
And so I'm sure there's lots of people who listen who maybe it's even freeing to know like sometimes we need to flex and navigate. Not
Yeah.
everybody's just gonna, we're not gonna snap our fingers and have everybody just fall in line in our home.
Exactly. Exactly. Like there are
So
attention points for every family. Like my
yeah.
husband, he's pretty on board. His parents are naturally like the ultimate minimalist before minimalism was ever a thing. They
Okay.
keep very little. And it's so nice when you're at their house because it just feels like being at a hotel, like, where there's just the bare minimum.
Mm.
And so he can be like that in some ways, but when it comes to a couple of things like outdoor equipment, because he loves to play outdoors, so he likes the mountain bikes and the
Mm.
gear. I don't really. But I just have to say, like, that's who he is. I can live with it.
It
It it
probably brings
it
him
does.
joy. It
It
sounds like
does. It
that
brings
stuff
him
brings
joy,
him
and
joy.
we use that stuff as a family. We have like kids kayaks, and it really does make great memories. But a lot of times I'm like, can we just go on a hike? Because that involves no gear, where we're spending all this time loading up the van or the truck. Um, so there's always going to be tension. Nobody's ever going to have it be easy when you're in a family, I think.
Yeah.
But
Well,
it works
Erica,
well enough.
how would you define clutter? We're talking about making space for what we most want and need and really wanting to move through life with a general sense of ease and peace or calm, but also
Right.
joy. And
Right.
so that makes me think I didn't even ask, like, how would you define clutter?
Yeah, that's when I would say it's anything getting in the way of the life that you really want. So whether it's physical or mental or emotional, it's somehow impeding what you want. So
Mhm.
in my book, The Minimalist Way, I encourage people to identify their unique personal values. So we start with your top 3 personal values. And then if you want to, you can break it down further into having some values for a few different areas of your life, like family and relationships, or your home, or community, or spirituality. But just knowing those top 3, I think, helps you. And part of the challenge is identifying what values are uniquely you, and they're not values that you think should be you, or
Mhm.
maybe that you were raised with, but like what's inherently at the root of you. But
Mhm.
once you know those values, and once you really have a better picture of the kind of life you want to lead, then it becomes easier to run all of your decisions through those values. So you can run anything from clutter, like, does this contribute to my values? Does this piece of something physical contribute in a meaningful way to building my values? And if it doesn't, maybe I could let it go. And then also mental clutter, like all of the commitments and things that are on your calendar, are those contributing to your values and to the life that you envision for yourself? And if they're not, then maybe you can let them go. And then emotional clutter, thoughts you have about yourself or your family and loved ones in your life. how are those contributing to your values, and are they building you up and helping you create the life you want?
Yeah, and I always love tying this to even our finances, right? Like,
Absolutely.
it's not wasteful if it is aligned to your core values and giving
Exactly.
you joy, right? And moving you toward
Exactly.
this. Yeah. So
Right.
in our home, we've always, I highly value creativity and
Yeah.
education, sort of not as in sitting in school, but like self-directed
Lifelong.
learning.
Yes.
So we've always invested in good art supplies, books, musical instruments,
Yeah.
travel, things like that, because it really lights us up as a family.
I
Um,
love that.
and
That's
it's part of our family
nothing goes but our
culture.
gear. Yeah. That's
So,
beautiful. How do you define clutter with your community? Similarly?
I mean, I don't usually. It's because it's
Yeah.
not like a clear focus of my work.
Right.
But it seems I agree with that definition. So I'm very much like, as you were talking, I'm like, yeah, there's so much crossover in, I think, our hearts for people and like the
Mhm.
work that we do. So if I'm helping somebody think about creating a life vision or handcrafting a right-sized life, I'm always
Yeah.
starting at the top with a sense of purpose or mission, your core values,
Mhm.
sort of in the same way, but it's yeah, thinking about who and how do we want to be in the world, and then what does that look, sound, feel like for this season of life.
Great. Yeah.
And so I would then define clutter as, yeah, anything that doesn't support us in this season in moving us closer to that vision that we have for who and how we want to be. And
Right.
interestingly, it doesn't mean it wasn't a beautiful part of our life last year or 10 years ago, or that it couldn't be in the future, but in this
Right.
season, it's no longer one of my priorities. And I
Yeah.
think that's super helpful. And actually, even in my membership this month, one of the ideas that we're talking about in this, as we, within the context of making space, is this idea of, who we used to be and needing to let go of what was to make space for what will be. And this can be an emotionally charged idea,
Right.
like so hard. And but it's like, acknowledging, I think, the emotion wrapped up in it, but then also realizing that, this every season does bring new challenges and also new gifts. And unless we release the old, we don't have room for the new beautiful opportunities and learning and connection and all of that. So
Right. That's so freeing. But I know exactly what you mean about how hard it can be to let go of that when you're like, well, that was me. That was my life for a
mhm,
long time.
yeah. Yeah, and it can be things like, because I homeschooled for 15 years, as my youngest went off to school, we had all sorts of educational things and books, and some of it was just like, it was time to let it go because I no longer had little people. But I'm not a stuff person at all. Like, I don't have much attachment to, like, it's very rare that there's like attachment to a specific thing.
hmm
But the emotional part of the letting go, man, I was teary. Like, it was like, oh, this is like letting go of a whole season, a beautiful season of life. And
Yeah.
so, yeah. Um, all right, I'm actually going to jump ahead to one of the other questions I had for you.
Okay.
And you wrote, I want to do life each day, each moment, less on autopilot and more on purpose. So when we know our why for something, we're more likely to achieve our desired goals and to create sustainable habits. And you already addressed that when you talked about even like bringing clarity in around our core values and then letting our behavior flow out of that awareness.
hmm
So I'd like to continue the conversation by talking about making space for our lives for what matters most. But how, you did talk about the values, but how else can people do this work to identify what they want or need? And where would you suggest someone begin? And you talked about how it can be tricky to sometimes get really honest about my core values, not who I think I should be or who I used to be, or maybe who my sister is or my bestie,
Exactly.
So can you just chat what comes up for you around this idea of, or what, maybe your experience in helping people do this work, like in figuring out what is it that I want or need?
Right. Yeah. Oh, I'm mad at myself for jumping ahead because my main thing really is determining your unique values and then using them as a guide for your life. But I love what the kind of work you do in envisioning. I really think it comes down to vision so much. Like we have a family purpose statement that we've had for years, and the last is just like 5 little tenets. And if I ask any of the kids at any time, they may not get them in like the order that we have them framed in, but we can get them together, you know. But the last one is live with vision. And I think if you aren't like letting yourself dream and picture who you might want to be in 5, 10, 50 years, then it's so impossible to build that life now, you know. So I recently heard, I was listening to, I have mixed feelings about Rachel Hollis, but in her book, Girl Stop Apologizing, she mentions this idea of, I think she calls it 10-10-1. So the overall idea is you envision what you want your life to be like in 10 years. And she asks all of these super specific questions, like, I can't think of them off the top of my head as well as she says them in her book, but you know, like, what do you look like? Like, what are your relationships like? How would other people describe you? Just like everything, all encompassing, so many aspects of your life. So she talks about imagining what you want to be, who you want to be in 10 years, and then 10, I think it's 10 dreams that will make you be that person. And then one goal that you can work on now to become that, because we can't chase 10 things all at once. But what I just liked about that in general was just having such a vision of what you might want your future to be, like how you want your kids to, you know, think of you or interact with you. And we won't have control to make that reality exactly how we might envision it. But without vision, you know, we can't get there at all. So I think vision is such a huge part of that, you know, making a vision board, just picturing in detail what you want for your future, and then just ever so slowly chipping away at it. You know, it doesn't mean you have to be all of that now, but just choosing like one habit you want to focus on for now, and then adding another one eventually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. An idea that I've shared in probably different interviews, I don't know, but it was something that I started practicing when my kids were a lot younger and homeschooling. And one of my girlfriends who I met online through her blog, and she was homeschooling, and she shared something. This was before she was my friend, but she shared, I think this is why we became friends. She shared something about thinking about how we want the people in our home to feel.
Uh-huh.
And it was the first time, later I came across Danielle Laporte's work about Core Desired Feelings. But the first time I ever encountered this idea was from my friend Renee of renee2god.net, in case anybody wants to check her out. And it really was transformative in my home and helped me to even, like, I've always been kind of like, this sense of vision, I wouldn't have used that word back then, but I think I've always been this way. Whereas I know that some people, they're afraid of thinking too far ahead. It's actually quite frightening. My husband's like that. But I really loved that idea because I had always been so much like goal oriented. So it was more about outcome, like, you know, getting the kids to have certain grades or get through curriculum or whatever. And but then I would become kind of anxious and grouchy, and I would lose sight of
Right.
what was most important.
Too finite. It was just, yeah.
Well, and I realized like that the outcome was not actually my priority at all. What was my priority was a sense of connection and trust and creativity and great conversation. And there was, but I lost sight of that because I lived kind of a performance-based life as a perfectionist, and I was certainly very principled and all of that. But anyway, so that really was transformative because it actually, without me realizing what was happening, that idea started to help me care more about crafting this vision that I had for my relationships and my home, and even for myself, the kind of mom and woman I wanted to be. But it framed it in a different way, where it wasn't actually about outcome per se at all. It was about the little incremental ways, the little choices, but how I showed up. And then that would flow out into, how do I talk to somebody, my partner? What is my inner dialogue like? What did I choose to spend my money on? Like all of these different choices.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's just incredible what having a bigger vision can do for you. It often, like, I always am reminded of it when we either hike and we get a really good view, or we're away from home and maybe on a vacation. Like that, I think that's one of the things that one of the great things that travel can bring into our life. For some reason, when you're away, like everything just kind of comes into focus a little bit better, you're less bogged down in the day-to-day of managing your life and your family and your to-dos. And you're just able to step back. So whether it's because you went on a good hike and got a good view, or you left town for a little while, I think getting connected again to the bigger picture can really help us take so much pressure off in the day-to-day. And because we realize, oh wait, it doesn't actually matter that my child have this outcome. What matters is that we blah, 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 blah,
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, if we just tie this to the pandemic, even, where moms are needing to, it's not even real homeschooling, but it's like trying to educate at home to the best of your ability when you've been thrown into this. And, all of the encouragement right now, which I totally agree with, is that really what's most important here is your connection with your child.
Absolutely. Their mental health.
Yeah, not the academics per se. And that would be a concrete example where really then you're walking a line to your bigger goals and values, not getting sucked into the quagmire of, these outcomes or details, which really in, a month or so or a year, they're not the thing that's going to drive your life, like in the biggest way.
Right. Like for us, I mean, this experience of pandemic, it bites. It's so obnoxious. But when I can step back enough, I can see that this is also a really hard, but also for us, like really beautiful season. We're safe. We're well. We still have financial security. My husband still has a job. I still have my online work, and we're going on evening bike rides all the time. And we're all in our home all the time because my husband's been working from home now even longer than the kids have been out of school. It's beautiful in some ways, but what it takes is stepping back and seeing that. And sometimes when I'm like managing the 7-year-old's goldfish style attention span, it's very hard to see. But when I can step back, I can recognize beauty in it. And that's just how everything is. If you can just find the big picture.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we chatted about, so I'm just going to come back to this idea of, so if somebody is thinking, okay, well, how do I do this work of figuring out what do I want or need? With all the noise, all of the different opinions, all of the books and all of the possibilities, we chatted about a few different ideas, identifying your top 3 core values. We talked about the idea of potentially writing a family mission statement, if you're not married, perhaps
A personal one,
a personal one. I do that, by the way, every year as I'm coming up to my birthday in July. I always just kind of listen in and notice, and I always get sort of an idea, a phrase, a lyric, something that comes up. And it's like, it speaks to me, and it's like that becomes sort of a guiding light for my whole year.
That's great. Yeah, a lot of people do that with the one word kind of practice for the calendar year.
Yeah. We also talked about, maybe doing like some kind of a vision board to help you, whether it's like for this season of life or, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. And you might do that old style, cut and paste, or you might do like a Pinterest board. Like there's all sorts of ways that people can go about this work. But was there anything else, Erica, that we already chatted about that you want to throw out there just as a recap of that idea?
Yeah. No, I feel like we covered it pretty well. The recap is just take the time to find the big vision. to find the big picture, step back, because you'll find a lot more peace in your day to day.
Yeah.
How you do that, I don't know I don't think there's a right or wrong. There are a lot of great avenues for doing that. Like you said, and we've mentioned all of them, a bunch of them. So.
Yeah. And okay, so I'll just mention one final idea because I know that it
Yeah.
comes up in my own life, and I think it comes up a lot in, and I honestly, I think this is just part of the human experience. But I chat about this idea of competing tensions and desires. And just when we just acknowledge that all of us are going to have competing tensions and desires in life, there's always a lot of ways more, that we could spend our money, expend our time, use our strengths in this world to contribute, whatever. And it's okay that, because this is just reality, that we can't do it all at once. So that's why I like the idea of seasonal living as well, is that it's not bad. It just might not be right for this season. It just may not be priority. And even if we think about that in terms of motherhood, I certainly have found that there's parts of who I am, my interests, my dreams, that I intentionally and joyfully, I feel like I laid them down for a season so that I could focus on building a nest and homeschooling. That was a season of life. I'm in a different season now where I'm picking up those other parts of who I am and dreams and working on those. And I think, when I'm 65, it's going to look different again, but none of it's bad. It's just, moving through life, understanding that we can't do it all at once. And when we give ourselves when we ease into that, I think that alone can remove a lot of the clutter. Don't you? Where it's like all that noise, like, oh, you should be doing that, but she's doing that. And why can't you do all the things? And it's like, I can't do all the things. I'm tired. Like, I need sleep.
I don't want to. No. Yes, I think that can give so much peace, because imagine the young mother out there right now who is having to set some things down, but she doesn't have that. She doesn't have Krista on her shoulder saying, just because you're setting them down for now doesn't mean that you're forsaking them forever. You'll have other opportunities. So I think that gives us so much more hope. I just wrote something on Instagram maybe yesterday about the idea that life is short, but God willing, and if we're very, very lucky, life can be long. So it isn't for everyone, of course. But I kind of think that idea, life is short, like seize the day mentality, I think sometimes that just scares us into almost being stagnant, or it makes us feel guilty because we're not like seizing every opportunity that we possibly can right now. So that's why I love your seasonal living idea too, that there are different things for every season. And if you're lucky, you'll have a lot of them. So I try to take the pressure off myself and just believe that life is going to be long enough for me to do the things I care about, God willing, of course, in time, but just not all at once. And I find that to be very relieving.
Yeah. And I hadn't planned, like this was an unexpected little detour, but it also makes me think, I've been thinking about this a lot, Erica, but the idea that like when I was raising my little people and homeschooling, we barely had the internet. Like it was coming about, but moms weren't trying to do all that. Like, I mean,
right.
moms were always full, lives were always full, but
Right.
now I feel like there can be just such incredible pressure, because you see all these different things on social media and I'm like, I am so grateful, not gonna lie. Like I love the internet and I love my online work, but I am so grateful that for me, I didn't have to compete with those things at once. I could focus on making muffins and doing art projects with my kids.
I feel like that about my teens and college years, because social media wasn't really a thing yet, I mean, people had email addresses and maybe IM'd each other, but that was about it. But the degree of comparison that we're subject to now because of social media, although it can be a great gift too, it adds a whole another dimension to it all, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it does. And like you said though, which I always mention too, is that well, I was reading some research around social comparison caused by social media, and actually it was a bigger struggle for the younger crowd, less for people who are about 35 and up. So that's good news, because I think we just have enough life wisdom to understand, okay, that's not the full picture.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, let's move over into this other research actually that talks about how for women in particular, our stress tends to rise in proportion to the actual clutter in our homes. And this is actually a big topic. And for men, it doesn't seem to impact them quite as much. And that's probably because of, the information that has come out of other studies that show that the home and family responsibilities still tend to be considered the women's domain, even in dual income earning homes. So there's a lot of pressure on women to be responsible for the kind of well-being of the family, all the management of the home, and women are stressed out. So just a teeny little aside that my 20-year-old daughter would appreciate, because she's a super messy human, highly creative, brilliant person, and like a whirlwind everywhere she goes. That there is actually some, I don't remember if it was just one study or whatever, but some information that suggested that a small amount of clutter can actually boost creativity. So I am not proposing to anybody listening that you have to have a sterile home or have like a home where you only have 100 things, right? So we have kids art on the walls. We always have stacks of books. We are always in our kitchen making food. Like it's like but it's tidy and everything has a place and all of that. But anyways, so let's talk about this idea about stress, which is huge, about taking care of ourselves by also acknowledging the impact that clutter can have on our mental health, just all of this. And I would just love for you to just jump in, say whatever you have.
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. Anytime I reference this study or even just how does clutter make you feel in my online community, women just come out of the woodwork talking about how stressed it makes them feel. And then sometimes I'll ask this question, like, when you got rid of your clutter, what did you find instead? And I love that reframe, especially because it focuses on the positive and the end goal and the beauty that you can find when you reduce what you own, because most people are saying things like freedom, time, mental space, better connection with my loved ones. Then those are just huge things that I think that we really all ultimately want. So I think it's shocking how getting rid of some stuff and finding a place for the things that you do have can allow you to achieve and welcome into your life those much bigger, more beautiful goals. But I like that too about how creativity can thrive with a little clutter. And in all my work, I always try to encourage people to find the way that they want to live, not the way that they see somebody else doing it on Instagram or the vision of minimalism that they have in their heads. I mean, it still comes down to your core values, filling your home with the things that contribute to those values and bring you happiness and joy. It's going to look very different for everyone. And that's 100% okay too. Let's see, what else did we want to touch on?
Well, can I interrupt and just ask you a question that popped into my brain?
Yeah.
So can we just chat for a second about a personal example? Like what's something that you've experienced? What have you, can you think of an example where you said, okay, I'm ready to kind of let go of this and this is what happened?
Yeah.
The positive result.
Okay. Well, the reason I started all of this really was just a simple story that I think a lot of people have a parallel story. And that's just that when my kids were little and I was like knee deep in, midnight baby feedings and toddler tantrums and just the beauty, but also the heaviness of young motherhood. Then I just remember like this one distinct moment where I looked around the house after I had gotten the kids to bed and realized that instead of taking care of myself with my off time, I had to now clean up after the day, just because it looked like the baby and toddler section of Target had exploded in my living room, baby bouncers, swings, blankets, bottles, sippy cups behind the couch, toys, like those light up toys that they literally play with for 3 seconds and then just leave on the floor. Just all over. So that's where I started, just this realization that in order for me to give them the person that I wanted to be and to give myself the person that I wanted to be, I couldn't keep devoting this much of my energy, physically and mentally, to taking care of our home and our stuff. So then I started decluttering. I kind of started with the kids' toy collection. You know you're a parent when you're in their closet at night with a flashlight so that they can sleep while you declutter, because you do not want your 3-year-old's opinion on every little thing. It's different when they're older, but when they're 3.
Yeah, I understand there.
So then I boxed up a ton of their toys and only really kept the imaginative sets, things that they could, interact with differently every time. So like blocks and toy soldiers and toy ponies and, things that they could manipulate. So I kept the few sets that we kept at the top of their closet, and I left one set down for them to play with. And the next morning they came into a room that had, a quarter as much stuff as they were used to. And they didn't complain. I was afraid of how they'd react, but they just got busy playing with the set of blocks combined with ponies that I had left out. And then I just realized that they actually got more creative with less stuff. I could throw a blanket over the dining room table and they would turn it into a fort, and it was that easy, So I feel like their creativity wasn't hindered by having less, to an extent. I'm not talking about having none, but having less. And I started to feel a lot better. So I got rid of even more our own things. I slowly reduced my wardrobe to just having things that I really liked to wear, and got rid of hand-me-down furniture, sold stuff on Craigslist, and slowly replaced things to things that we really loved. And then I just found so much more freedom and peace. And it's not perfect. That doesn't mean I'm not still managing a bunch of stuff, because I have 3 active elementary aged children right now. But it's so much better. So for anybody who's listening and is in the thick of it right now, I hope this inspires you to just reach for a little bit more peace by getting rid of a little bit of stuff. See how that feels, and then you can always build on it from there.
Yeah. So just briefly, I want to share that for me, even though I've never had a lot of stuff, so honestly, I've always been I love order. I've always been that way. And I just really have never been into stuff per se. I do sometimes overbuy books or things like that. And then I have limited shelf space, so then I just share them, take them to the library, whatever.
Right.
But something that made quite an impact on me was actually only about, I'm just going to say about 6-ish years ago. I'm not quite sure. It could be 7 maybe, but it was, it was related to my wardrobe. And I bought a lot of secondhand. I never had a lot of clothes, so it wasn't really about quantity per se.
Right.
But I always was I felt like I should dress more feminine. I have things that were pretty, and they weren't me. And I just wasted money. And then there were always weddings and things, and I was spending a lot of money on these outfits that I never would wear again. And then, so one day I finally just decided I was done. I was going to have a minimalist wardrobe. I was just going to stick with things that actually I feel good in. And I'm very sensitive. So things, if you have to shift them around, I just lose my mind. So I just thought, I'm just not doing this anymore. I'm just going to be me. And it was really for me, that was a really powerful thing, because honestly, it sounds weird. Not only did I save a lot of money and frustration. So let's say there was a wedding, I didn't have to think anymore, oh, what am I going to wear? I just always make sure I have a pair of black dress trousers. I always have a couple things I can wear. And so it saved me money, it saved me mental energy and feeling oh, I don't feel good in my body. But it was tied for me to self-acceptance.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I no longer
that you brought up earlier. Yeah.
What did you say, Erica?
I think, what stood out to me was that you said the word should. Yeah. So you had been thinking, I should, or want to dress a little bit more femininely or a little bit of a different way. But then when you finally let go of that should and you just accept, yourself and your style the way it is, then it's so freeing and empowering.
It really is. And I walk with more confidence. I
Exactly.
generally feel like, even if it's like, well, this is the real me. Like, I love being barefoot and flip flops. And like, I wear, I have this one yellow scarf that I brought to San Francisco when you and I met face to face, but it's been with me to France. It's been with me to like, just all over all these different travels, the same one scarf, and I love that. I just love that. So anyways, I'm bringing that up just in case somebody else listening is like, needing to figure out for themselves, what is my starting point? That's one that I would say it's interesting, like what can happen sometimes when we just start somewhere.
Smallest thing. Yes. Yeah, I love that. That's a great point.
All right, so we need to come to the end of our time right away, but would you offer listeners a handful of habits, strategies, or routines to keep the clutter at bay? So if they start somewhere, they start doing this work, how do they make sure that they stay the course and they don't allow their lives to fill up to overflowing all over?
Sure. Okay, so I think one of the most important things you can do is it's this idea that at least as far as I know, started with a writer, Francine J. And she talks about how we often think that we need to organize, but we really need to declutter. So if you're consumed with organizing your stuff, I would just challenge you to shift a little and reframe. You might be spending a lot of time organizing things that you don't really use. And my guess is that's not time well spent for you, because those things, you will just have to keep repeatedly organizing them. So start with decluttering instead of organizing your stuff. And then you can just do some really simple practices like set a timer for 10 minutes and declutter one small space for 10 minutes. Not your whole house, one small space. So like a drawer, a cupboard, the linen closet, something small. And then when the timer beeps after 10 minutes, you're done, guilt-free, and you can feel really good that you got a solid 10 minutes done that day. If you happen to want to do more, you set the timer again for another 10, but always the same. After that timer beeps, you are free to go, done. You got something good done, you can feel good about it. And then, so let's say you tackled a really small space, like the counter, the cabinet under your bathroom counter. Every time you open that, try to really lean into the joy that you feel from that small decluttered space. Just like think about how it feels to see that empty space and to know that whatever you needed to get from that place is easy to get. It's right there. And I think that's sometimes a step that we miss, is doing a small area to completion and then really leaning into how that area makes you feel. Because when you focus on that joy that you're finding, it's easier to want to expand that to other areas in your home.
I really like that.
Yeah, those are just super bite-sized, easy little tips.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I realize I said we met in San Francisco, which is not true.
Oh, yeah, Nashville, it doesn't matter.
My scarf did come with me to San Francisco also.
Yeah. So, I knew what you meant.
Okay. All right. So Erica, thank you so much. I know you're a wealth of wisdom in this, and you could have shared for 8 hours, but
no, you are. I love listening to you. I'd rather interview you than be interviewed by you because I could listen to you.
Fun chatting with you.
Yeah.
So do you have a final thought, a word of encouragement, or, just a final idea to share with people? And then please tell us how we can connect with you, where you'd love people to come and connect with your work.
Yeah. Okay. Well, very much like you, what I care most about for women is that they can come to that place of self-acceptance. So I just want women to find who they want to be and become it, and stop feeling this pressure to be everything for everyone or be anything that they just don't feel like they are. So this is just my gentle nudge to keep working toward the person that you want to be, not the person that you feel like you should be or need to be for anyone else. Just find who you are at your core and try to step one step into that. And you can find me pretty much anywhere at the Life on Purpose movement. So my website is ericalayne.co, but if you searched for the Life on Purpose movement, you'd end up there. And I'm on Facebook and Instagram as the Life on Purpose movement.
All right. Thanks so much,
Yeah,
Erica.
thank you so much for having me, Krista. Always great to see you.
Okay, I'll end record and then just stay with me for a sec.
Okay.